Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. We take those really dense stacks of research, pull up the key insights, the things you really need to know. Today we're tackling something that, honestly, it sounds a bit like science fiction, doesn't it? But it's very real, and it's forcing the entire global financial system to gear up for a massive upgrade. We're talking about the quantum threat to blockchain security, specifically the cryptography that underpins it all.
Yeah, and this deep dive, it's really getting into a pretty unsettling question. I mean, for anyone involved in crypto, whether you're an investor, developer, just curious, what actually happens to that whole trust structure? Think about the billions locked in Bitcoin, Ethereum, DeFi. What happens when computers arrive that can just break the encryption we rely on today? So our mission here is really about precision. We want to decode the science behind it, try to balance the hype, because there is hype, with the unsettling reality. And we need to outline the actual preparations already happening worldwide.
And it's not just some far-off risk anymore, is it? There's been a real sense of urgency building around this lately.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You see it in the attention paid to the fundamental research, the hardware side. Like the 2025 Nobel Prize in Physics, right? Recognizing pioneers like John Clark, Michel Devore, John Martinis for their work on superconducting quantum circuits. That kind of recognition really pushes the technology into the spotlight. And while we're celebrating these incredible scientific leaps, there's a flip side, a warning almost. The core dilemma is this. The very computing advances we're cheering for today, they seem to be on a path to becoming tomorrow's existential threat to how we trust things digitally.
Yeah, and for you listening, the stakes are really concrete. I mean, every single transaction you've ever made, the private key that secures your wallet, every bit of code in a smart contract, it all relies on cryptographic math. And that math, well, under the gaze of a powerful enough quantum computer, it could potentially be cracked wide open. We're talking about a fundamental threat to digital trust itself. So today, we're going to unpack the physics, what makes these machines tick. We'll detail the specific algorithms that are under threat. We'll look at the timeline, hype versus reality. And crucially, we'll cover the solutions being developed and the practical steps needed to, future-proof digital assets.
It's a big topic, but essential to understand.
Okay, so when people first hear quantum computer, I think the natural reaction is to think, oh, it's just a really fast supercomputer, like taking what we have now and just dialing it up.
Right.
But that really misses the point, doesn't it? It's a fundamental, almost mind-bending difference in how these things actually compute.
It absolutely does. That difference starts right at the basic unit of information. So classical computers, the ones we use every day, they use bits. And a bit is always definitively either a 0 or a 1. That's it. They work sequentially, step by step. Quantum computers, on the other hand, use qubits, and the physics governing those qubits gives them capabilities that classical machines they just can't replicate.
Okay, let's get into that physics then, because this is where the exponential power comes from, the thing that has the cryptography world worried.
It really boils down to two key principles from quantum mechanics. First one is superposition. So imagine flipping a regular coin. While it's spinning, maybe, but once it lands, it's either heads or tails, right?
Yeah.
One state. A qubit, because of superposition, can exist in effectively multiple states at once. It can be 0 and 1 simultaneously until you actually measure it. Think of it like exploring all possible answers to a problem at the same time, instead of checking them one by one.
Wow, okay, so instead of trying path A, failing trying path B, it's like exploring millions of paths all at once.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. And the second phenomenon is entanglement. This one's even stranger, arguably. If you link two qubits together in a certain way, they become entangled. Their fates are intertwined, no matter how far apart they are. If you measure the state of one, you instantly know the state of the other one.
Ah, that's the spooky action at a distance thing Einstein talked about.
That's the one, famously, yeah.
And it's the combination of these two superpositions, holding many states at once, and entanglement. Having those states linked instantly, that's the real source of the power.
Yeah.
The exponential parallel processing threat.
Exactly. That combination is what leads to this exponential power curve. The scaling is just incredible. Like, if you have just 20 qubits, you can represent over 1 million possible states simultaneously. Get up to, say, 300 qubits, and you can represent more states than there are atoms in the entire observable universe. It's this massive computational space that lets a quantum computer tackle certain types of math problems, specifically things like factoring large numbers or searching databases in ways that are just completely out of reach for classical computers, even the biggest supercomputers we have today.
We hear about labs hitting higher and higher qubit counts in the news, thousands even. But there's a catch, right? Maintaining that weird, powerful quantum state isn't easy. These aren't machines we'll just be plugging into the wall at home anytime soon.
Well, definitely not like our current computers, no. The quantum state itself is incredibly fragile. It needs to be almost perfectly isolated from its environment. Any tiny disturbance, heat, vibration, even stray electromagnetic fields can cause it to lose its quantum properties. That's called decoherence. So these machines typically operate at incredibly low temperatures, often just fractions of a degree above absolute 0 millikelvin. That's far, far colder than deep space. All just to maintain this delicate state, what we call coherence, for long enough to do a calculation.
And that fragility, that difficulty in keeping things stable, that's kind of the saving grace for now. That's why we talk about needing logical qubits, not just physical ones.
That's the critical engineering hurdle right now, yes. Every physical qubit, the actual hardware component, is inherently noisy and prone to errors because of that decoherence problem. To create a single, stable, trustworthy, logical qubit, one that can actually hold its state reliably long enough to run a complex algorithm like Shor's, which we'll get to, you need massive error correction. And that usually means pooling the resources of hundreds, maybe even thousands, of these noisy physical qubits just to create one reliable, logical qubit. So the complexity of maintaining coherence and building effective error correction is the main technical barrier protecting our current cryptography. For now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring this down from the super-cooled lab environment right down to your digital wallet. Why does the stability of a qubit matter for Bitcoin or Ethereum security? It matters because the security we rely on today is built on mathematical assumptions. Assumptions that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could just shatter.
Right. We depend on these public key algorithms, and they're based on a kind of mathematical trick, isn't that right? Can you unpack that trick for us?
Yeah, the trick relies on something called one-way functions. These are mathematical operations that are really easy to do in one direction, but incredibly difficult, practically impossible for classical computers to reverse. So the main public key algorithms are things like RSA, that's Rivest-Shamir-Edelman, and crucially for the blockchain world, ECC, which stands for elliptic curve cryptography.
Yeah.
RSA's difficulty comes from factoring large prime numbers. ECC's difficulty comes from solving what's called the discrete logarithm problem on an elliptic curve. Different app, same principle. Easy one way, super hard the other.
So putting it simply, it's easy for me to multiply two massive prime numbers together to get an even more massive number. But if you only have that resulting massive number, figuring out the two original primes I started with would take a regular computer, like thousands or millions of years.
Exactly.
And that massive number is effectively my public key.
Precisely. And in the blockchain space, especially for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many others, the real workhorse, securing almost everything, is the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, or ECDSA. ECDSA uses that elliptic curve math to make sure that only the person holding the private key can create a valid digital signature for a transaction. This proves ownership, lets you spend your coins without ever having to reveal the private key itself. That's the core security model.
Okay, now enter the quantum hackers, so to speak. They have specific algorithms designed to take these problems that are impossibly hard for classical machines and turn them into, well, much, much easier problems. Let's introduce the two main culprits.
Right. The primary threat, the one that really keeps cryptographers up at night, is Shor's algorithm. Shor's is basically a direct exponential killer for our current public key systems, RSA, ECC, and therefore ECDSA. It leverages a quantum computer's unique ability to find patterns, specifically the period of functions, to efficiently figure out those prime factors for RSA, or solve that elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem for ECC.
And when you say exponentially faster, we need to be clear. We're not talking about shaving off a few years from millennia. We're talking about a calculation that's basically impossible today, potentially taking, hours, maybe even minutes on a big enough, stable enough quantum machine.
That's the scale of the speed up, yes. It's brutal. And it means that the entire foundation of our digital signatures just collapses. The secondary threat, still significant but different, is Grover's algorithm. Now, Grover's doesn't instantly break encryption like Shor's does for public keys. Instead, it provides a quadratic speedup for searching unstructured data. For symmetric key encryption, think algorithms like AES 256, which are used for encrypting data itself, sometimes within blockchain systems. Grover's algorithm effectively halves the key strength in terms of bits.
Okay, so if you're using AES 256, which sounds really strong, a quantum computer using Grover's makes it behave more like it only has 128-bit security. Still tough to crack, but the safety margin is significantly reduced.
That's the effect, yeah. It forces us to potentially double our key sizes for symmetric crypto, to maintain the same level of security against a quantum attacker. But focusing back on the most urgent blockchain vulnerability, Shor's algorithm is the big one. It means a powerful quantum computer could, theoretically, look at your public key, which is often visible on the blockchain when you transact and work backwards, efficiently calculating your private key from it.
Once an attacker has your private key, well, it's game over, right?
Oh, it is, totally. They can generate valid signatures just like you can. They can impersonate you, drain your wallet completely, seize control of any smart contracts tied to that key. The entire trust layer that guarantees the integrity and ownership of transactions, it just evaporates.
Okay, so the fundamental math underpinning our current security gets broken by this future tech. The obvious, really urgent question for everyone listening has to be, how close are we? When is Q-Day the day this theoretical capability becomes a practical reality?
Right, and this is where we need to ground the discussion in engineering reality. It's really vital to distinguish between just building a large quantum computer and building a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, or CRQC. They're not necessarily the same thing, at least not yet.
Okay, so what makes a quantum computer cryptographically relevant? What are the specific demands for a CRQC?
A CRQC is generally defined as a machine that is both large enough and stable enough, coherent enough, with good error correction to actually run Shor's algorithm successfully against the kinds of cryptographic keys we use in the real world. We're talking primarily about 256-bit elliptic curve keys, the standard for Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, current labs, they've made incredible progress on the physical qubit count. You hear about IBM's Condor chip hitting over 1,100 physical qubits, or atom computing using over 1,000 neutral atom qubits with a different approach. Those numbers sound huge.
Yeah, 1,000 qubits sounds like we should be panicking right now. Why isn't that enough to break ECC 256 today?
It comes right back to that noise and error problem we talked about. Those are physical qubits, and they're fragile and error-prone. To actually attack a 256-bit ECC key using Shor's algorithm, the current estimates, and these come from really complex simulations of the quantum circuits needed, done by research groups at places like MIT and elsewhere, suggest you need a lot more effective firepower. We're likely talking somewhere in the range of 3,000 to 6,000 high-quality, fully error-corrected logical qubits.
Wow, 3,000 to 6,000 logical qubits. Why that specific range? Is it tied directly to the key size?
It is, yeah. The length of the cryptographic key, 256 bits in this case, dictates the computational complexity required. You need a certain number of logical qubits to represent the problem, and you need them to stay coherent for a specific number of operational steps, the circuit depth. Factoring in the overhead for the massive error correction needed to keep those qubits stable throughout that complex calculation, that's where those estimates of several thousand logical qubits come from. And right now, today, the best labs have only managed to demonstrate maybe a handful, literally single digits, or maybe low double digits of truly functional logical qubits. So there's still a massive scaling gap in the error correction technology before this becomes an immediate existential threat.
Okay, so the timeline is definitely uncertain. It seems to depend heavily on a significant engineering breakthrough in error correction. But the big institutions, the ones thinking about systemic risk, they're still taking this very seriously.
Oh, incredibly seriously. You look at timelines put out by bodies like the U.S. National Academies or NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who are guiding government policy. They often estimate that a CRQC might be possible by 2035. But, and this is a big but, they always add caveats. They stress that intense geopolitical competition or unexpected breakthroughs in different quantum hardware approaches like trapped ions or photonics could significantly accelerate that timeline. And there's always the concern that a state actor working in secret might already be further ahead than publicly known. Some experts definitely warn it could be sooner than 2035.
That brings up a really chilling possibility, doesn't it? The idea that the threat isn't just about the future hardware, but it's already impacting data today. This is the harvest now, decrypt later danger.
Yes, this is a critical point. It shifts the risk profile from purely future to partly present. The concern is that adversaries with significant resources, think state intelligence agencies or maybe very sophisticated, well-funded criminal groups, are likely already collecting and storing vast amounts of encrypted data. That includes encrypted blockchain transaction data, potentially sensitive communications, anything protected by current public key crypto. They can't break the encryption today with classical computers.
But they're essentially making a bet. They're betting that in, say, 5, 10, maybe 15 years, they will have access to a CRQC, and then they can go back to this massive trove of stored data and run Shor's algorithm on it retrospectively.
Exactly. It means that any sensitive transaction you make today, any confidential data you encrypt now, if it's intercepted and stored by such an adversary, its long-term secrecy isn't guaranteed. The future capability casts a shadow backwards in time. The confidentiality and even the non-repudiation of things happening right now are potentially jeopardized by a future technology. And that's a huge driver for why the push towards post-quantum solutions needs to happen sooner rather than later. Okay, let's try to translate this threat theory into the practical world of holding and using crypto assets. For the average user, where does this quantum threat actually hit closest to home? It's primarily in the digital signatures created by your wallet.
Right, and we need to pinpoint the specific weak spots. It seems like the type of address format you use really matters here.
It matters a lot. There are two main legacy address formats we need to consider in Bitcoin, for example, though the principles apply elsewhere. The oldest standard is called pay-to-public key, or P2PK. These are quite vulnerable because, with P2PK, the actual public key itself is broadcast and permanently recorded on the blockchain right when the address is created, even if no money has ever been spent from it.
Ah, okay, so if an attacker is doing that harvest now thing, they could grab that public key today and potentially have years, or however long it takes, to work on cracking the corresponding private key before the funds are even moved.
Precisely. They have the maximum possible time window. Fortunately, P2PK addresses are quite rare now. The vast majority of modern standard wallets use a newer, much better format, pay-to-public key hash, or PTPKH. This offers a significant improvement in protection, at least for a while.
How does P2PKH offer better protection against this quantum threat?
With PTPKH, what's stored permanently on the blockchain isn't the public key itself, but only a hash of the public key. Think of it like a fingerprint of the key. The actual public key is only revealed publicly for a very short period, typically right when you broadcast a transaction spending from that address. It's needed then, so the network can verify your signature matches the key hash. Okay. But that exposure window is usually just minutes, maybe even seconds, between broadcasting a transaction and it getting confirmed in a block.
Okay, so that dramatically shrinks the window for a quantum attacker to grab the public key and derive the private key before the transaction is finalized. Still not perfectly zero risk, but much, much better than P2PK.
Much better, yes. But it's still not foolproof, especially because of one major risk factor, which is actually bad practice even for classical security, reusing addresses.
Oh, right. This comes up all the time. Using the same address for multiple incoming payments.
Exactly. Every single time you receive funds to an address you've already spent from, you're essentially re-exposing that same public key on the network again. For classical security, this is bad for privacy. For quantum security, it's potentially fatal. It gives a quantum attacker multiple opportunities to capture the public key, confirms that the address is active and holds value, and just generally increases the attack surface dramatically.
It's like putting a bigger target on that specific key for any harvest now operations.
Precisely. And we're actually seeing large, sophisticated holders start to recognize this systemic risk and take concrete steps. A really interesting example is how El Salvador managed its national Bitcoin reserve. They initially held it in one large wallet, but then they deliberately moved the funds into 14 separate distinct wallets, and they capped the amount in each wallet at 500 BTC.
So that wasn't just about diversifying against, say, regular theft or losing one key. That sounds like a very quantum-aware strategy.
It appears to be, yes. By limiting the value tied to any single private key, they're minimizing their potential loss if one of those keys were to be compromised by a future quantum attack. If a CRQC breaks one key, only 500 BTC is at risk, not the entire national stash. It's a practical, real-world example of adapting basic crypto hygiene for a post-quantum future.
And we really need to stress this vulnerability isn't just about Bitcoin transactions, right? It hits the whole ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely. The impact is far broader. Think about smart contracts on platforms like Ethereum. They often hold huge amounts of value locked up, controlled by keys. Think about complex DeFi protocols, many of which rely on multi-signature wallets, or even the underlying consensus mechanisms of some chains. If any part of their security relies on algorithms like ECDSA, RSA, or DSA, they face the exact same risk the moment a capable CRQC comes online. Given the sums involved in DeFi, the systemic risk there is particularly acute. Guessed. Okay, so we've laid out the threat. The good news, if you can call it that, is that cryptographers have seen this coming for decades. This isn't a surprise attack. The digital arms race is definitely on, and the defensive strategy has a name: post-quantum cryptography, or PQC.
Right. PQC isn't just tweaking the old algorithms. It's a complete mathematical pivot. It's about developing entirely new types of cryptographic systems based on mathematical problems that we believe are hard even for quantum computers. Problems that Shor's algorithm, for instance, just can't solve efficiently. It's like upgrading from that potentially vulnerable wooden lock to a completely different kind of steel vault based on different principles.
That's a good analogy. And crucially, this isn't just theoretical research anymore. The global effort to standardize these new algorithms is well underway, spearheaded mainly by NIST in the US. They run multiple rounds of a public competition, evaluating dozens of proposals from researchers worldwide. And they've now reached the stage of finalizing the first set of standardized PQC algorithms intended to replace RSA and ECC globally. This signals very clearly PQC is moving from a science problem to an engineering and deployment problem.
Okay, let's dive into some of these new solutions. What are the main contenders? It seems like one family, lattice-based algorithms, is really emerging as a frontrunner.
Yes, lattice-based cryptography has gained a lot of traction, primarily because it offers a pretty good balance between security, speed, and relatively manageable key and signature sizes, compared to some other PQC approaches. These algorithms base their security on the presumed difficulty of solving certain problems in high-dimensional mathematical structures called lattices. Problems like finding the shortest vector in a complex lattice, known as the shortest vector problem, SVP. These are believed to be hard, even for quantum computers.
And NIST has picked out two main lattice-based algorithms for standardization, right? For different uses.
That's correct. For establishing secure communication channels, like setting up a secure session key for HTTPS websites, what's called key encapsulation or key exchange, they've standardized Crystal's Kyber, often denoted as MLChem, module lattice-based key encapsulation mechanism. Kyber is popular because it's generally quite fast, and the keys aren't excessively large, which is important for performance on the internet.
Okay, that's for setting up keys. But for blockchain, the absolutely critical part is the digital signature, proving you own the coins you're trying to spend. What's the lattice choice there?
For digital signatures, NIST has standardized Crystal's dilithium, or MLDSA, module lattice-based digital signature algorithm. Dilithium is currently seen as maybe the best all-around option for signatures. It offers reasonably fast signing and verification, which is crucial for high-throughput blockchains, while still providing strong security against known quantum attacks. It does need more real-world testing and optimization, though.
Okay, so lattices are leading, but there are other approaches too, right? Like hash-based signatures. These sound simpler, maybe more trustworthy.
They are highly regarded for their security proofs, yes. The main standardized one here is FinCNESA, denoted SLH-DSA, stateless hash-based digital signature algorithm. Hash-based signatures derive their security directly from the underlying cryptographic hash function used, like SHA-256 or SHA-3. Since hash functions themselves are thought to be relatively resistant to quantum attacks, only needing slightly larger outputs to counter Grover's algorithm, the security of SYNCIN Plus feels very robust, very conservative. Some call it belt-in suspender security because we have such high confidence in hash functions.
So if SYNCIN Plus is arguably the most securely understood, why isn't it the default choice for replacing ECDSA everywhere, especially in something as critical as Bitcoin?
The main drawback is performance and size. SPCS Plus signatures are significantly larger than dilithium signatures, maybe 8 to 10 times larger, or even more, depending on the parameters. And the process of generating a signature can also be slower. For a network like Bitcoin, which is already struggling with block size limits and transaction fees, adding that much extra data for every single signature is a really significant overhead. It's a major engineering challenge and potentially impacts decentralization if node requirements increase too much.
Got it. Performance trade-offs. And then there are other families too, like code-based crypto. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, things like classic Michaelis. This is one of the oldest PQC proposals dating back to the 1970s, based on error-correcting codes. It's generally considered very secure, having withstood decades of cryptanalysis. However, its major practical limitation is the size of the public keys. They can be enormous, potentially hundreds of kilobytes or even megabytes. That makes them pretty much unworkable for applications like blockchain, where keys need to be stored or transmitted frequently and efficiently.
Okay, so the takeaway seems to be, we have the PQC solutions, the algorithms exist, but making the switch isn't free. It comes with potentially significant costs in terms of performance, data size, and resource usage.
That's absolutely the core challenge for migration, especially for existing large-scale decentralized systems. Every PQC scheme generally requires larger keys or larger signatures or both compared to ECC. If Bitcoin, for example, were to adopt lithium, you'd still be looking at larger transaction sizes, potentially slower verification times network-wide, and increased storage requirements for the blockchain itself. This bumps up against the fundamental design goals of networks optimized for efficiency and minimal data. Adapting the underlying infrastructure, things like the Bitcoin script language, transaction formats, block size limits, to gracefully handle these larger cryptographic elements without breaking everything or centralizing the network. Well, it's a monumental engineering task.
Before we get into the migration strategies, just briefly, there's another defensive tech that gets mentioned sometimes using physics directly. Quantum key distribution, or QKD. How does that fit in?
Right, QKD is fascinating. It's conceptually very different. It uses principles of quantum physics, like the no-cloning theorem, to securely distribute a secret key between two parties. The core idea is that if anyone tries to eavesdrop on the quantum channel used to send the key material, the very act of measuring the quantum state disturbs it in a detectable way, alerting the legitimate parties that the key has been compromised.
So it offers theoretically perfect secrecy for the key exchange itself, but does it solve the main problem for blockchain, which is about signing transactions decentrally?
Not directly, no. Yeah, QKD is primarily point-to-point. It's great for securing a dedicated communication link, say between two banks or data centers. But it has significant limitations. It's generally distance limited due to signal loss in fiber, although repeaters are being developed.
It requires specialized, often expensive hardware infrastructure. And most importantly, QKD solves the problem of secret key exchange, but it doesn't replace the need for a digital signature algorithm, DSA. Blockchains need a way for users to publicly prove ownership and authorize transactions in a decentralized setting, which is what digital signatures do. QKD doesn't provide that function. That said, we are seeing rapid progress. People are testing chip-based quantum digital signature QDS networks now over significant distances, like 200 kilometers. So the idea of leveraging quantum physics for security, maybe even beyond just key exchange, is definitely advancing quickly. It points towards a future where security might involve both PQC algorithms and quantum physical methods. Okay, so the scale of this quantum threat, it's so broad, hitting everything from global finance to military comms to critical infrastructure, that governments are really treating it as a clear and present danger. Not some distant sci-fi possibility, but an immediate systemic risk that needs regulatory attention now.
And in the U.S., the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, seems to be looking at this very much through a financial stability and national security lens, right? They're pushing for frameworks.
They are. The key document or initiative to watch is the Post-Quantum Financial Infrastructure Framework, or PQFIF. This isn't law yet, but it's a strong indicator of regulatory direction. It basically outlines a roadmap for pushing the entire U.S. financial sector towards full quantum-resistant security. It sets target windows for compliance, often cited as somewhere between 2028 and 2035, though these are still being debated. And importantly, the framework emphasizes more than just adopting PQC algorithms. It stresses things like cryptographic inventorying, forcing institutions to actually figure out where all their vulnerable RSA and ECC keys and protocols are currently used, which is often a huge task in itself. And it generally recommends a phased rollout, often suggesting a dual-stack approach during the transition where systems might support both classical signatures and new PQC signatures simultaneously for a period.
That idea of a dual-stack approach really speaks to this concept of crypto agility, doesn't it? That seems to be the underlying philosophy regulators want to instill.
Crypto agility is absolutely paramount, yes. It's essentially the ability for an organization, or even an entire network, to upgrade its cryptographic algorithms relatively quickly and smoothly, without causing massive disruption or breaking compatibility. Regulators understand that the quantum landscape itself is still evolving. New attacks might be discovered, or better PQC algorithms might emerge. So they need institutions to build systems that aren't rigidly locked into one specific type of math, but can adapt, be agile, swap out protocols if needed.
And we're seeing similar moves in Europe, too, integrating this into their big digital finance regulations.
Definitely. Major regulations like DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and MiCA, the markets in crypto assets regulation, are increasingly incorporating quantum threats into their requirements. They're mandating that financial entities, including crypto asset service providers, explicitly address quantum risk in their risk management frameworks and their operational resilience planning. Essentially, preparing for PQC is becoming a required part of regulatory compliance.
Okay, so the regulators are pushing, and we can see this reflected in actual industry activity, too. There are concrete examples of companies not just waiting, but actively preparing.
Yes, definitely. You see major players collaborating. For example, HSBC and IBM ran pilots years ago looking at quantum-safe cryptography. specifically testing PQC candidates for securing things like bond trading platforms. Within the crypto-native world, Ethereum has been notably proactive. They've dedicated significant resources, reportedly over $30 million, specifically to research and development around quantum resistance. This includes exploring the integration of lattice-based cryptography, potentially using things like quantum-resistant zero-knowledge proofs, which is cutting-edge stuff.
And then there's the big one, Bitcoin, which faces probably the toughest challenge due to its governance model. But there is active work happening there too.
There is, although it's complex. There are ongoing discussions and development work around Bitcoin improvement proposals, BIPs, aimed at enabling a transition away from ECDSA towards a PQC-safe signature scheme. The huge challenge for Bitcoin is achieving network-wide consensus for such a fundamental change via a soft fork or hard fork. It's technically difficult, politically contentious, and incredibly slow. Plus, developers have the added constraint of trying to implement these potentially larger PQC signatures without blowing up the block size limit, requiring very clever engineering and possibly new data structures.
It seems like the more centralized tech platforms can move much faster then.
Absolutely. Look at companies like Cloudflare and Google. They manage huge amounts of internet traffic. They aren't waiting for Q-Day or final mandates. They've already been running large-scale pilots, securing a noticeable percentage. I think figures like 18% were mentioned for 2025. Pilots of their web traffic using post-quantum key exchange algorithms, typically in that dual-stack mode alongside classical algorithms. This proves that the PQC technology is ready for production deployment, at least in centrally managed systems. The real bottleneck is coordinating the upgrade across vast, decentralized ownerless networks like Bitcoin.
So if the PQC algorithms are basically ready and centralized systems are deploying them, what's the single biggest hurdle left for a network like Ethereum or Bitcoin to actually complete the migration? Is it just that consensus problem?
Consensus is huge, but there's another massive challenge.
Yeah.
What do you do about all the existing funds secured by the old vulnerable keys? The migration involves not just upgrading the protocol, but handling the transition of potentially trillions of dollars worth of legacy assets. You have issues of complexity, potential performance hits we discussed, and critically, interoperability. If only half the network upgrades, you risk splitting the chain. So the best practice being seriously discussed right now involves that phased rollout, a long grace period for users to voluntarily move funds, and then potentially a more forceful mechanism.
Forceful mechanism. That sounds a bit concerning for a decentralized network. What does that mean?
It is controversial, but many see it as potentially necessary for the long-term survival and security of the chain. The idea gaining traction is that, after a well-communicated grace period, future network upgrades could be implemented that would effectively freeze assets held in old, vulnerable address types like PDPK or even PDPKH if they haven't been moved or interacted with using a new PQC-compliant signature. This essentially forces users to migrate their funds to new quantum-safe address formats to retain access. It's a heavy-handed approach, but the argument is that it's the only way to ensure the entire active value on the chain eventually becomes resilient, preventing a permanent pool of legacy assets from remaining vulnerable to that harvest now, decrypt later threat indefinitely. Hashtag outro. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really paints a picture. Quantum computing isn't some kind of immediate apocalypse for crypto, not a doom clock ticking down to zero tomorrow, but it is an incredibly serious and arguably urgent call to action, a call to basically reinvent the foundations of digital trust. The encouraging part is that the defensive technology, post-quantum cryptography, it exists, it's being standardized, but the real hurdles now are global coordination, implementation speed, and managing that complex transition.
Absolutely. The industry is moving, the regulators are definitely pushing, but perhaps the most important preparation really starts with individual action. For you, listening right now, there are immediate, practical things you can do to start future-proofing your digital assets against this quantum threat. So let's list them out. 1, take a look at your wallets. Really audit them. Make absolutely sure you're using modern wallet formats that minimize how much your public key is exposed. Primarily, that means using addresses derived from hashes, like P2PKH or newer formats like SegWit that hide keys even better. If you happen to have any funds sitting in very old P2PK addresses, seriously consider moving them now.
Okay, step 1, use modern addresses. What's 2?
2, this is basic crypto hygiene, but it's doubly important in the quantum era. Do not reuse addresses. Simple as that. Every single time you receive a payment, generate a fresh new address for it. This dramatically limits the exposure of any single public key on the blockchain, minimizing that window for a quantum attacker to harvest it and target it.
Right. Good advice anyway, but critical here. Number 3.
3, stay informed about upgrades on the platforms you use. When your preferred blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, or your wallet provider or the exchange you use eventually rolls out PQC upgrades, and they will, be ready. Be prepared to actively move your funds to the new quantum-safe address formats they introduce. Don't just leave funds sitting in legacy addresses assuming they'll be fine forever. Proactive migration will be key.
Okay, modern addresses, no reuse, be ready for upgrades. And number 4.
And 4, demand crypto agility from the services and platforms you rely on. Ask your wallet provider, your exchange, your custodian, what is your PQC migration plan? What's your timeline? Ensure they are actively thinking about this, planning for that dual stack implementation, and building systems that can adapt as standards evolve. Security in this new era can't afford to be static. It has to be agile.
Excellent practical advice. So here's a final thought to leave you with, connecting the sort of abstract crypto stuff back to the physical world. We heard earlier that researchers are already demonstrating functional quantum digital signature networks using things like integrated photonic chips, sending secure signals over standard citywide fiber optic cables today. So if that physical layer security is becoming feasible now, maybe the crucial question isn't just if blockchain can survive the quantum threat using PQC math alone. Maybe we should also be asking, how quickly can this emerging standard of actual physical layer quantum security be integrated across finance and critical infrastructure? The future battle for digital asset security might not be won just on the cryptographic algorithms, but on how seamlessly we migrate to this next generation of trust, potentially bridging both advanced math and quantum physics across this rapidly evolving cryptographic battlefield.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Wanna